Okay, Romans chapter 16, and this is why you pay your pastor the big money to be able to read through these names. Paul writes, I commend to you our sister Phoebe, who is a servant of the church in Centria. Welcome her in the Lord in a manner that is worthy of saints, and assist her in whatever way she may need your help. For she has certainly been a helper for many people, including me. Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who risked their necks for my life. I am not the only one who is thankful to them. All the churches of the Gentiles are as well. Greet also the church that meets at their house. Greet my dear Andronicus, who was the first convert to Christ in the province of Asia. Greet Mary, who worked very hard for you. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my relatives and fellow prisoners, who are highly regarded by the apostles. They were in Christ before I was. Greet Ampliatus, my dear friend in the Lord. Greet Urbanus, our fellow worker in Christ, and my dear friend Stachys. Greet Apelles, who was tested and approved in Christ. Greet those who belong to the household of Aristobulus. Greet Herodian, my relative. Greet those from the household of Narcissus, who are in the Lord. Greet Tryphena and Tryphosa, who worked hard in the Lord. Greet my dear friend Persists, who has worked very hard for the Lord. Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, who was a mother to me too. Greet Centric, Phlegon, Hermes, Petrobus, Hermas, and the brothers who are with him. Greet Philologus, Julia, Nereus, and his sister, and Olympus, and all the saints who are with them. Greet one another with a holy kiss. All the churches of Christ greet you. But I urge you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and offenses contrary to the teaching that you learned, and keep away from them. For such people are not serving Christ our Lord, but their own appetites. By smooth talk and flattery, they seduce the hearts of the unsuspecting. Your obedience has become known to everyone, so I am very joyful about you. But I want you to continue to be wise about what is good and innocent about what is evil. The God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. Timothy, my co-worker, greets you, along with Lucius, Jason, and Sosipater, my relatives. I, Tertius, who wrote down this letter, greet you in the Lord. Gaius, my host, and the host of the whole church, greets you. Erastus, the city treasurer, greets you, and Quartus, the brother. Now to him who is able to strengthen you, according to my gospel and the proclamation of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery that was veiled in silence for long ages past, but now has been revealed to the prophetic scriptures and made known to all the Gentiles, in keeping with the command of the eternal God, resulting in the obedience of faith. To God, who alone is wise, be glory forever through Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, so Paul is finishing this letter with these greetings to the Christians in Rome. Again, he hasn't been there, and so he's greeting all the people that he knows. And he starts out with Phoebe, and he says that Phoebe has given a lot of help to many people. And in his commending her to the Roman congregation, that there may be the implication that she was the one that's carrying this letter to them. Because obviously they didn't have social media or email or Amazon or the US mail to deliver things. And so they would take ordinary people and have them deliver these things. So as we go through this, what I thought we would do is just kind of as we talk about these different people, I want you to think about different people, maybe in our church, your church, if it's not here at Water of Life, just throughout your life that you know of that kind of exemplify the work of these people. So how about someone like Phoebe, who's just a helper of many people? Can you give me examples? Give me one example of someone that you can think of that's a helper of many people in the church. Scott Martin, why? Yeah, so Scott is someone that he's probably done work. He's done work at your house. He's done work at my house. probably done work at a lot of other people's homes, and he always does a good job. And then he does a job where it's far less than anyone else of his quality.
Question.
Yes.
In my notes, it says woman deaconess.
Sure.
No, I thought women were titled to.
Yeah.
I kind of was confused with that.
So, yeah, so deaconess, a deacon and a deaconess is servant. A servant.
Okay.
And so in that servant role, and that's a good place to bring this up. So I was talking to a classmate of mine, and I was asking him about elder work. And because we used to have a really good active elders group at Epiphany. And then with COVID, those were the older gentlemen who were kind of more afraid of COVID. And then with the merger, and then just things just happened that we really haven't had a good active elders group for the last 2 years, except for our head elder, Don. And it's just kind of holding things together by himself. And I left a voicemail for Don yesterday after talking to my classmate. And what my classmate's church is doing is they've gone away from the elders and more of a shepherding with deacons and deaconesses. And so I'm talking to Don about doing something like that here, because in that respect, you could have the deaconesses that, you know, are elders, and we would have, you know, the deacons, the shepherds, that they're calling people once a month, encouraging them to be in worship, maybe encouraging them for a special event we have, encouraging them as we're getting the greeters started again. Well, can women do that? Can women do that sometimes better than the guys? Yeah, sometimes. And so that's why the pastor encouraged me to consider having deaconesses, you know, servants in that respect, as that encouraging. Now, you would still have the elder, the head elder, Don, kind of oversee everything, and that have that male headship and so forth. And so, and this pastor's already talked to the district presidents, or conference of presidents, and, you know, there's that service attitude. In the same way that you have staff ministers that are graduating from Martin Luther College with a degree. We have our staff minister here at our school as a school chaplain, Mark Blauer. We have another member who's a staff minister, is a school chaplain at Hope Schools, Mike Tracy. But you also have female staff ministers. And I was talking to someone the other day that there's a young lady who's going to be graduating very soon from MLC, and she's just a fantastic evangelist. So can you have a congregation that wants, and this is one of the things that I encourage churches to consider when they're looking for more help to do outreach, they always think a pastor. And I always ask them, can you do a staff minister? Do you need someone to preach? That would be the pastor. If you don't need someone to preach, can it be a staff minister, a servant? And does it have to be a male staff minister? Could it be a female? Because again, can women be sometimes better communicators, especially to moms with little kids in the school? Yeah. And so to use her in that role as a helper, as an encourager. So good question on that. Yes, sir.
On this whole chapter, you said these people were all in Rome?
Yes. Yeah, in that area.
But he had never been to Rome, but he knew them anyway. So these people were like trained back in Asia or somewhere.
Yeah. So let's see. Phoebe. She would have been. So Paul is writing this letter from the city of Corinth. Phoebe's home city was Corinth. And we look at Priscilla and Aquila. That's the husband and wife team that played a vital role in Paul's work. And we saw them first in Corinth. And then they went with him to Ephesus and assisted him with his missionary work there on his third missionary journey. And so sometime during Paul's third missionary journey, they returned home to Rome. So somewhere along the line, he's meeting these people.
And they were all in Rome when you go through that.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, one of the says reach.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, just before I came up here, I talked to Ron Kimberlane and, Bev Kimberlane's son. And then I asked, well, how his mom is doing. And she's doing remarkably well. They've taken her off the pain medication and she's rebounded. They thought that she was near death and hospice care, and now simple Tylenol is doing the trick. And I said, well, every time you or your sister call out, automatically think it's the last time. But what I mentioned is that George Krause, Pastor Krause's son, had asked on Facebook for Ron's number because he must follow us on Facebook, and I always post on Sunday morning the prayer request, and Bev was in there, and I know the Kimberlanes and the Krauses were really good friends. And I talked to Ron, and he said that 2 of the Krause boys had a mail route, and when they couldn't do it, then Ron did it. And I just mentioned that George Krause had asked for Ron's number, and I said, and I just think of that as that's kind of a neat thing of, it had to be like 30, 35 years ago when he was at this church, when his dad was here, and still he follows what's going on in this church. That's what I see Paul doing here. All right. How about Aquila and Priscilla, fellow workers with Christ who even risk their necks for my life? Can you think of people in your church that do that work alongside the pastor really well? Yep.
Dave and Sandy.
Dave and Sandy. I think you can put Dave and Sandy for a lot of these.
They need to have that room, maybe, have a bed for them, make it more comfortable for them.
Yeah, I know.
They're here all the time.
They are. They're here more than I am. Yeah. And I thought David Sandy too. And I think of
Mary Hansen.
Yep, Mary Hansen, Barb. Over at First Evan, I think of Scott and Mary Pierce. The same kind of thing like Dave and Sandy. Mary does the secretary work. Scott fixes everything around the church. Same kind of thing. Well, what would either one of our churches be like if you didn't have an Aquila or Priscilla, Dave and Sandy, Scott and Mary? And you just, hopefully other people go up. And when I was thinking here about this, I was thinking of Eleanor Sorensen, just someone sticking her neck out for a pastor. So years ago, it was shortly after I got here, we had an issue in our school, in our lower school building here, that we were getting anonymous emails and I had a couple, but mainly directed toward our assistant principal, Adam Pavlicek, who was our 2nd grade teacher at the time. And they were nasty. And so back then we had an old-fashioned written printed newsletter. And I wrote something about anonymous letters. And on Sunday morning, both Bob Kimberlane and Eleanor Sorensen stopped me because I'd written it in such a way that they thought I was the brunt of the anonymous emails. And they both said, I'll defend you. Just let me know who it is when you find out. And Eleanor said always, I'm your defender. Well, later on, when Eleanor became homebound, and she lived pretty close to the church, I'd bike to do a shut-in visit at her. And as I'm bringing my bike into her house, she said, oh, Pastor, I had to defend you again. Oh, now what? Because it was always the other older ladies at church. And she said, oh, someone called and asked, do you think Pastor Zarling bikes everywhere because he's trying to tell us that we don't pay him enough? And I said, oh my goodness. I said, well, you could tell whoever this is that the last knee surgery I had, because I had ACL and then MCL surgery on my left knee, that the doctor told Shelly, my wife, that I don't have any cartilage in my knees anymore, so I can't run. And I said, and I don't want to be the fat pastor, so I bike. And she said, no, I just told her, don't you have anything better to do than to bother my pastor? And Eleanor could get away with that because whoever she was talking to, she was probably older than that other lady and had the respect too. So, that defender of a pastor's ministry. Go on to verse 5. Greet also those, the church that meets at their house. So have any of you ever worshiped in someone's house? You want to talk about that? What was that like, and where, and why?
In our house.
Your house. Was that when you first got into the ministry?
In Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Because that was totally new. There was nothing.
You started a brand new church out of your house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, it partly, I think the Bible classes were more in our basement, and we had a dentist office where things were met, but everything was done from somebody's house.
Yeah.
Or something.
Robin, how about you? You've been all over the place.
No.
No, okay.
We haven't worshiped. I mean, we've done in-home Bible studies,
Yeah.
and that we're all Friday night, kid-friendly, bring everybody, but not an actual worship service.
Okay.
No, they've all been established.
Yeah, but think of the growth groups. I've heard a lot of really good things going on with the growth groups, even though they're smaller than we wanted, and they're the active people that they're doing it. It's something. It's a start, and those growth groups are really house churches. Okay, just small groups. And I always say what Mark Blauert had said. If you got like 15 people in worship, whether it's this campus or the other campus, 15 people, that's pretty small, and it looks like a cult. But if you have 15 people in someone's home for a Bible study, that's a big group. And so that's why, doing those small group Bible studies. And thinking of the house church, one of the couples that we had on our podcast several weeks ago, Jared and Katie Sunstall. In fact, right after this afternoon, Shelley and I are driving to New Ulm, Minnesota, because Jared and Katie's daughter, Madison, is graduating from MLC tomorrow. And Madison is one of the first girls that I baptized in Kentucky. So all these years later to go, and I promised the kids, if you're from my church, I'm going to be at your graduation. And then I bring you a kringle too, rhubarb kringle. Because when I bring donuts to the school kids, the kids, how come? Because I was bringing to the teachers. Now, when do I get one? And I said, when you graduate from MLC, I'll bring you donuts. So I made a promise to them. But going up to MLC and Jared and Katie, so they're in the military, and he's now a colonel. He was a sergeant back then. But when we had them on our podcast a few weeks ago, and they talked about that when they were out, where are the officers trained? West Point, when he was a professor at West Point, and there wasn't a Welsh church nearby. So they were able to get the names of our Welsh men and women who are at West Point, and then they had worship services in their house. They used, there's enough pastors that put their services online and things like that, and they could use lots of those materials, but to worship in the home, which is kind of a neat concept. And then just that concept of always thinking it has to be in a church building. I had a phone call yesterday from Pastor Knazer, who used to be the district mission board chairman. Now I am. He was my district mission board chairman when I was a missionary, but he's at Woodlawn in West Dallas, and he was talking about how there are 3 churches there are merging. So there are 3 churches, all probably really close, like our churches are here. And at the time, they thought it was a good idea to have these 3 smaller churches. Now they realize it's probably better if we're one big church. So they're selling their 3 church buildings, their 2 school buildings, and building one big church and school. But in the meantime, they need a place to worship together, because they said we're averaging 450 for worship. between the three churches, but their churches only seat 200, 250 maybe. So they're going to be worshiping in one of the two school gyms, but they're trying to figure out, well, how do we, they just want to talk to other missionaries that often start out in someone's gym or in a school building. Our church down in Kentucky, it started in a bank with 10 people, all those kind of things that we think of. We're so blessed to have a sanctuary at both beautiful sanctuaries, but just that mindset of setting up and taking down, folding chairs and a pulpit and an altar, all those kind of things and people really, you buy in because you have to, because if someone doesn't do their job, you don't have a church that day. So anything on that? Okay. How about the end of verse 5? Epanetus, who was the first convert to Christ in the province of Asia. Can you think of converts to the Christian or even just to the Lutheran faith that stand out to you? Someone that's converted and now they're on fire for the Lord.
But it was 20-some years ago.
That was you?
That was me.
All right, you want to tell the story?
It was probably 28 or 30-ish. Tried, I would go to church at the Catholic church, but they didn't want me to be a member because I had kids out of wedlock, and I wouldn't baptize them. And, my friend Laura brought me to the Wells, and I started going to Bible study and really learning more about what the Bible had to say, because I didn't really know a whole lot.
Yeah, and now we've got Jamie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jamie is a friend of hers from pool, right? From playing pool. Yeah, and Jamie trying to set up a conversation with him just because he's going through some tough times. And just when I talked to him on the phone, he said, yeah, I've been at church the last 4 weeks. And I said, that's probably more faithful than a lot of our members, 4 weeks in a row. But just to see, the blessing, what Louise and others in the church, when the Holy Spirit grabs hold of them. And then you see, you've seen it, where you've got like a line of mom and her kids being baptized, or dad and his kids, or some of our past church presidents, Scott and Martin, he was a convert in his adult life, to see where he's at. Jay Mudrak, to his baptism and adult confirmation come up in my newsfeed every once in a while to see that he became church president. Arlie Allen, same kind of thing. I think of, I was standing almost exactly right here in this room with Tom Wagner, that Tom and Christina is Arlie's niece, and then he encouraged her to come and take the classes, and then she brought her boyfriend Tom. They were teenagers or babies back then, and she joined right away. But Tom, it took 2 years, I think, and that was fine. He always came to church with her, but it was here on a Sunday morning after church. He said, "Pastor, I'm ready to be baptized now." And then he said, "And I'd like to be immersed." And I'm thinking, oh boy. And then he said, "Because I like the symbolism of having my sins drowned underneath the water." So, well, that's awesome. All right, we're doing it. And so it was my one and only immersion in Arlie's pool. And I thought that it was just going to be a small group, Christina and Tom and Arlie and Cindy and maybe, the moms of Tom and Christina and her parents. Well, we opened the gate and the backyard's full because Tom and Christina are Hispanic. And so the whole family is there, and we're there in the pool in September. So it's not real warm. in the white old confirmation gowns and baptized him. And then everyone's clapping and cheering, which you don't have at church baptisms too often. But now to see where Tom is, Tom's on our school board, and those kind of things, just to see where people were at and that conversion. And we that have been maybe Wells our whole life get excited about those baptisms, those adult baptisms, those adult confirmations. Anything else on that?
These are all Wells from birth, or
Missouri. Missouri.
See, Paula, you were a convert, Catholic, yeah. Yeah.
I'm always one of my family that was Wells. My mother was Catholic, my father was Methodist, and it was my aunt and uncle. They kind of talked to my parents, and they became Lutheran, but they were Missouri Synod. So my family was Missouri Synod, but when I came along, they had changed to the Wells. So I'm the only one that was baptized and confirmed in the Wells. But my husband's Catholic, but he's this much Catholic.
There you go.
I was Catholic, but I always had a tie to Joy girl, my wife. Wells from birth, or down to Sally. So we had ties. I was married in this church actually. Which I thought, oh, it's pretty generous of them. I don't know if they would do that. What was funny was when I joined Wells officially, at the time Pastor Fresher was with. What did I get myself to war around here for a year?
Wow.
And I was Wells for like a year, and then I was asked to go on church council. So I was on church council when Pastor Gresham was here. And it was really interesting church council meetings when he was here.
I had to hear some of those stories later.
The last day that he was here, I don't know if you guys was in church the last day that he was here. We call it Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah, blow up Sunday.
Blow up Sunday.
That's what I heard. Yeah, blow up Sunday.
A couple of the women were walking around there fuming, and he was up at the pulpit. I'm not leaving,
Yeah, we'll have to tell that story after we're done recording. We'll have to tell that story for everyone.
Still pastor of this church, and I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
Well, I'm the only one born here in this church, I guess.
I said, wow, this is really an interesting church.
Yeah. And then with that too, so a couple of things come to mind, and I still always think about Pete Treckman's, but very similar to you, Larry, that Pete's wife, Cindy, grew up in this church, and he always came, but he wasn't a member. And so I saw him one day when I was picking up the girls at the middle school downtown, and he was picking up his kids. And I asked him, hey, Pete, you ever thought about becoming a member? He goes, I've been coming to this church for 13 years, and no pastor has ever asked me about joining the church. And I said, well, that's not me. So I made a point, there's anyone that's ever close to any of our members, spouse, child, parent, I'm there. And so in 2 weeks, Lord willing, we'll know about, we're going to the seminary for a graduate. And if we don't get a graduate, we've talked to a retired pastor about coming in and serving us for 20 hours a week. And he's a go-getter, even though he's retired, that he doesn't want to just preach. Because one of the things that I commend you guys for putting up with seeing a different face in the pulpit every Sunday. And yet I've talked to people and said, well, I don't mind. I like hearing different guys talk, but just have that continuity to have him here every week. So you see me and then him and then me and then him, but he also wants to visit our shut-ins and do evangelism visits. And so what I want him and I to do, if that works, if not, Lord willing, if we have if we get a pastor, that to go and visit our school families, to visit our member families and our non-member families, just really ramp up our outreach on these things for this conversion. How about verse 7? Andronicus and Junia, my relatives and fellow prisoners who are highly regarded by the apostles. So it sounds like, they're in prison, just like Paul is, or has been. Maybe they're a missionary team, husband and wife team. So can you think of prisoners or people that that have been in jail and yet been converted to Christianity?
The question was Paul in prison before Rome?
He's been in prison in and out. This isn't his in Rome prison, but like when he was in Philippi, he's thrown in prison and so forth.
Don't know anybody personally, but I've heard some great stories.
All right, well, I'll share one of the great stories you heard.
Oh, okay. My sister, she used to treat this young boy too, and I read the book. He was accused of killing some, I don't remember details, but just make a long story short, he was absolutely abused horribly, and he had done this horrible crime that he was accused of, and there's all kinds of evidence that he really wasn't. So, but he was put in prison, the youngest boy that was put in prison for life. And my sister just would go visit him sometimes, and he was supposed to have just the strongest faith. It was like his security to be there. And I don't remember the name or anything, but it was a book. And that's what comes to mind.
What comes to mind is Gary Zenda. He tells this story. He's done prison ministry for the Wells for a long time. And he tells a story about a young man that he's had in his Bible studies in prison, that as a teenager, this guy killed his friend and then chopped up his body and put him in all over the town in garbage cans and so forth. Well, he was caught, thrown in prison for life. But there in prison, the Holy Spirit touched him and converted him, and through Bible studies of Gary and others. And Gary tells a story that he then chose, I think, to go to Waupun, which is a much tougher prison, because they have the ministry there to train guys to become pastors. So he's that on fire for the Lord, and he'd rather go to a harsher prison to be able to minister to other prisoners in this way. And so just that to know that God, obviously he works everywhere, but to see that the fellow prisoners of the Lord.
One of the first places I go to is over in Christ. They always have a story on how somebody is converted, and they're just in I don't know, maybe it was February, March. These two people, they were in prison, and one of them, and they ended up being leaders in the church once they got out. I don't know if you remember that story, but that's one of the first places I go, because I think it's very interesting to see how these people joined the Wells. And this story was about these both of them had been in prison, and they weren't in prison together, but they ended up being very good friends, and they were leaders. They ended up being leaders in their Wells church, and they found the gospel, and it was through the prison ministry that they had heard about the true gospel, and they had struggled with where they wanted to go to church and everything. And so, yeah, if you don't, that's always a really interesting article in there.
Yeah, so Forward in Christ, another one, if you go either on, Water of Life social media or Facebook and in the Wells and so forth, but we'll share stories, similar stories from our home and world missions, just to to hear and read those stories is really interesting. It gets us on fire for the Lord because, let's face it, we've been Christian for a long time, Wells Lutheran for a long time, and then we start getting lukewarm in our faith, and to read these stories and get us fired up again. And I have to admit, that's what happens as a pastor. Last Thursday, it was so cool. I was out at Shoreland. I refed some soccer games out there. And then I had to wait for Belle to get done with some activities that was inside. And so I made phone calls. I talked to Louise's friend, Jamie, and I talked to a mom that they were involved down at New Life in Kenosha with Pastor Bergman. But I learned from Pastor Bergman, because I called him afterwards, that the reason that they moved up to the north side in Wind Point is their house in Kenosha had burned down. And the mom's not a member. Dad is, but it's kind of handicapped. But the reason the mom wanted me to talk to her is because they have a 16-year-old boy that's homeschooled, which is great, but he doesn't know anyone. And he was really involved in the youth group down in Kenosha. And I said, we're blessed. We have 27 kids at Charlotte. These are awesome kids. We have a lot of youth activities, and she just eating this all up. She wants him to be involved in those kind of things. And I was just having fun that night, just to be on the phone doing outreach. As you read this, does it seem like Paul is a one-man missionary show? No. What do you need to have a successful church?
Growth.
Yeah, you need lots of people. You need growth. Do you need a pastor? It certainly helps. It certainly helps. But can the pastor do it all? No. That's how he gets burned out, if he's doing it all. Same thing with the people. Can they do it all? They can do a lot, but they want that symbiotic relationship of pastor and people. And that's one of the things, again, with the growth groups, of raising up more leaders. When I was at the Excelling in Grace retreat down in San Antonio 2 weeks ago, I was with obviously a couple of my classmates, and two of them, good friends of mine, were saying how after they left their places, one in Minnesota and one in New York, that shortly thereafter, the pastors that followed them didn't do so hot and the churches closed. And then they were talking about how my church that I was blessed to start down in Kentucky, that after I left, they built a church, they expanded and grew. And they said, well, see, Mike, the churches that we were at, they couldn't handle it after we left. Your church flourished after you left. And I said, or maybe I just trained my members to be able to carry on after I left. They go, oh, that was a good one. And I don't know if that's not true or not, but that's one of the things that sometimes happens too, is the pastor, the called workers, the teachers, they do everything. And then the members, and when that pastor leaves, what happens? No one knows how to do anything. So that's why we train up each other to work alongside of each other. I went walking with our dog this morning, and one of the Bible studies I was listening to talked about how the Greek word for the Holy Spirit that Jesus uses is called comforter or advocate, paraclete. And in the Greek, you just take those words apart, and it's paraclete is walk alongside of. Well, I think that's a great word for pastors and people, isn't it? You are a paraclete to your pastor. The pastor is a paraclete to you. We walk alongside of each other to build up the church. So how about, there's a whole bunch of verses here that talk about hard workers. You think of other people than the ones we've already mentioned that are hard workers in the church.
Well, we have some, but you wouldn't know who they
Well, that's
are.
okay, but you can talk about them. I think that's important.
I would say Don and Phyllis and engaging members, they were married there and everything. And they do keeping the church clean, they Yeah, they always make sure everything's done.
Yeah.
I think they're there a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else?
Struts.
Oh.
Okay. Sally?
Sometimes you'll see your teachers,
Right.
it's called workers.
Yeah.
But you know, Don's getting quite older, knee surgeries and everything, and yeah, you know, I mean, it's gonna have to go on.
Yeah, the teachers. So what was really neat last week or 2 weeks ago is they had, last week, they had the home and school, so that's their parent organization. They organized for Teacher Appreciation Week of members coming in, parents coming in, and just doing recess for the teachers and so forth, so the teachers could just enjoy an hour off. They brought in food and so forth for them. And a number of our members were doing it, and the kids ate it up. Our members ate it up. Don Kirby was here the other day for chapel because he and I had a meeting afterwards, and he wanted to wait after chapel to give high fives to all of his first graders that he and his wife Judy were watching. And so that's one of the things we're going to work on next year, of trying to get more of our members, because you guys know this. It's just hard when you don't have kids in the school and the school is apart from the church to have that connection. And so we want to have more things like, I think it was really cool last month that we had our robotics team here talking to you guys about their robotics. We want to have more students like that. But to be able to help our teachers, like Sally said, you know, they work long hours. I always tell the teachers, because I go in for an hour and I'm done. And if I have to teach for like a day, I'm exhausted. I don't know how they do it. Like, and then I learned this too. You have to hold it and not go. You can't just go to the bathroom whenever you want. Right? You're on your feet. You can't go to the bathroom.
They know how you do that.
No, I don't.
Just put one of the biggest kid in the room in charge.
Yeah.
And they say, if anybody talks, gets out of their seat, let me know. And the little kids, they love to tell on each other.
Yeah.
It's true. Because I served many years, and it's my time. Yeah, you got to go. So I would put the biggest kid in charge, and then I would go, and I come back, and they'd be sitting there nice and quiet.
Here you go.
I do some of the same when I take them with me. And that sounds awful, but I go in to use the bathroom. There's this whole line of 30 kids outside the door.
Oh.
And the big one in front to tell us.
It would depend on your class.
Yeah.
Maybe you have some real troublemakers, then you might have a problem.
Yeah.
And I do it for like 25 years, like Mrs. Bush.
Oh yeah.
And, I could never.
Yeah. You know, and for me to be able to lay into the kids, I can do that because I'm only there, twice a week. But for a teacher to lay into the kids every single day, numerous times, it's going to get old for everyone. And so you just have to learn that classroom management. And, they learn how to do this kind of stuff. So, for example, my wife Shelley is an aide in the school building. When she was gone, we had a parent come in as an aide, and one of the 7th graders told his mom, and then mom told Shelley this the other day. She said, he said, yeah, I didn't like it when so-and-so was there because she just yelled at us. And then her mom said, well, doesn't Mrs. Darling yell at you? He goes, yeah, but she yells at us because we got it coming. I thought, well, that's awesome. But at least they know she's fair when she yells at them. And then just working alongside these kids was really neat. I just started this in the beginning of the school year. I told the teachers here at the ECC, the kindergarten or the preschool through 2nd grade, I said, I'll just come in once a week and just read for 15 minutes. And I don't have the time to go out and do recess and so forth, but this I can do. And then Dave and Nancy Ring, our principal and the lady who's in charge of this campus over here, they asked the other two pastors from First Evan to do the same thing. And so we do it at the third, fourth, and fifth grade. And so then like last week I was over there at third, fourth, and fifth grade. And then one of the third graders is having a real issue. And you know Rachel Bushkoff, and she knows me, obviously, because I'm a pastor. And she said, he won't talk to anyone, not to me, not to our principal, not to our school chaplain. And she asked him, will you talk to pastor? Yeah, I'll talk to pastor. He sat down. I sat down next to him, just blurted everything out. And it was just cool. And only, he doesn't know me. He's not my member, but he knows me just because I sit down and read with him. So one of the ideas, try and get to know your pastor, your teacher outside the classroom, but that's added more time to the pastor and teacher schedules because they're trying to do other things. So yeah, the members and pastors working alongside of each other. But what about verses 17 and 18? So Paul here's talking about the blessings of fellowship, but now he talks about avoiding fellowship. So the Apostle Paul tells us to do two things in regard to false teaching. What does he mean by saying, watch out for those who cause divisions? Why do you say, watch out? This is verses 17 and 18.
That's what they're doing, trying to cause problems within the church and like gossip or something, and just say, do you know that they're doing that?
Okay. Yeah, get your head up, look around, watch out for these things. And then what does he mean by keep away from them? Yeah. So let's apply this to church fellowship then. You know, that one's a really difficult issue. What do you do? Now, let's say there's not a Welsh church in your area, because we're blessed here in this area. We got a Welsh church every couple of miles. But let's say you're out east, out west, down south. And you may have to drive an hour or two or more to find a Welsh church. Do you go to a non-Welsh church? If so, why? If so, why not? Okay. What's the danger?
There was no danger. It was like going back 15 years in the Wells. It was such a conservative estimate.
Yeah, you were in a conservative Missouri, right?
That was kind of interesting. John was at a pastor's conference. He was gone last week in Montana, Billings, Montana. And I don't know if it was because he had Wisconsin was in seminary, sure or what, but he was at the airport, and this lady asked him, you know, what he did or whatever, and he told him, he told her what he was doing, and she said, do you know Pastor Bickerhoff, who was the pastor at Billings, and who John had just worked with and been with and a lot, and she said, oh, I love Pastor Bickerhoff. He said he is just such a wonderful pastor and everything. And asked, well, are you well? Well, no. She's Episcopalian, and she could not find a conservative church. And I said, Episcopalian, is that right? Presbyterian. That is the way I like.
Okay.
And but she said, we looked for somebody that was teaching the Bible or whatever, and she said that Bickerhoff was the closest to any whatever. And they talked, and he asked if they joined, and no, we just go to church there because they're still looking for a conservative. They're very Presbyterian, and they're when you grow up something, it's kind of hard to people that have changed. Anyway, it was just kind of interesting that here because he was preaching the word of God, and they go to church there, but they're not ready to join.
Yeah.
because of the background.
So a lot of people will look at the Wells Church, and because of the doctrine of fellowship, how we separate from other people. And this is one of the main passages, Ascetis Doctrinae, the seed of doctrine, the main passages we use. Keep away from them. And does that mean we can't be friends with them? No, we want to be friends so that we can bring them in. What I had a conversation with someone recently. She wanted to be confirmed, and she had gone through the classes and was ready to be confirmed over at First Evan, and then got upset when Pastor Reckley, who's like the nicest guy ever, said, well, you're living with your boyfriend, so that's not right. And then she came over here, I think, to see if we would take him. And I said, well, we kind of agree with what Pastor Reckley said. And then I said, it's not a no, it's a not yet. And we want you here, but we got to work on something. So it's not a not yet. And I've used this before in the Bible study, what Professor Brugge has said about fellowship is it's kind of like a picket fence. We're on one side of the fence with the truth of doctrine, and then the other churches are on the other side of the fence. But we can't, people like to sit on the picket fence, but that's uncomfortable. And we like to make it comfortable up there for them. And the key is, no, if we really believe that false doctrine is harmful, which we do, then we got to say, this is wrong, but we lovingly try and bring them over to the other side of the fence. And that may take a long time, but then we get to rejoice with that conversion like we were talking about. And when I've taught on the doctrine of fellowship in different settings, whether it's our grade school or high school, church, who do you think has the most problem with the Wells doctrine of church fellowship?
Sinners.
Well, yeah.
A church or women, I think.
No.
That with
It's Wells people.
That's what I was going to say.
Why? Why is it Wells people have the most issue with this doctrine?
They get criticized.
What's that?
They
get criticized for it.
For having that, because it doesn't make sense to
Yeah.
a lot of people. They don't understand.
They don't understand. Yeah. And so we want to waffle. We want to back down. And a big thing that I teach on this is, in all of my years, 25 years in the ministry, I have only one person, you guys know who I'm thinking of, that's ever left our church, taken the classes, and then went back to their heterodox church. And the heterodox meaning not true church. But it wasn't because, and that one person wasn't because he disagreed with what we were teaching. It was more family things. That's where he felt comfortable. And again, I've been blessed in 25 years in ministry, lots of adult confirmands. And the adult confirmands, they see the false teachings that were in their church and church body. And once they hear the true gospel, they don't want to go back to that. Now, they may fall away from the faith and stop going to church altogether, but they don't leave here and gravitate toward their false church again. Okay? So we are the ones that have problems because we don't know what's out there. We think everything's like what we have. And all you have to do is just go sometime. You have my permission as pastor to not be here on a Sunday morning, but go to one of the other churches on a Sunday morning and listen to what their pastor, their priest, or whomever teaches. And then come back and compare it with what your pastors that you're hearing from our pulpits preach. And then you're going to see the difference. And then you thank God that we have this true teaching that you've learned. And now you realize why Paul warns you, stay away from them.
Can I add another an interesting story?
Yeah.
Back in Pennsylvania, when John started this church, one of the main, he was a young man, and his wife were some of the people that our church basically started because people that were in the Elka realized that they were steering away from the true word of God and believing things that weren't correct. But the wife of this man, her mother was a Lutheran all her life. Her father was a Catholic. And when they started going, and she had the mother had sisters, her mother was the only one that was married out of this large family. And all these sisters came to our church when we were starting, and the father took these sisters to our church. He dropped them off. He was Catholic. He dropped them off, and he would go to his Catholic church. And this happened for 3-4 years. Well, I don't know how long, but this every Sunday they were there, and and then he'd go to his church. And all during this time, John visited them all the time. He'd visit this Mr. Munya, and they talked, and they just he was, receptive. And then one Sunday, and this was after a few years, he got all dressed up in a suit and everything, and his wife said, "What are you doing?" And he took these sisters out to church, and he went to church with them, and he ended up that after that he was at church all the time, and he ended up joining our church after being Catholic all these years, and it was from the word of God, but with I don't know if you say the persistence of John, just going and talking to them and everything, and he was confirmed and was a member and was one of the strongest members, which was, and it was just so interesting because he was totally against the Lutheran Church and what it was all about. So it's worth continuing to talk to people if you if you have the true word of God. I just always thought that was just, everybody was just shocked when he walked into church.
Yeah, and then I would encourage you, if you've got people, just you keep talking to them and then encourage them to come talk to me. Take the classes. That was one of the things that my wife Shelley had mentioned. She was, you should get back into teaching the adult confirmation classes. I'm glad that Mark Blauert has taken on those classes for Water of Life and for Stevie in the last few years. Give me a little bit of a break. But like Shelley said, you're really good at that. In fact, when I was at funeral, planning the Christian funeral a little while ago, one of the daughters, she and her husband had gone through the classes, and she said, we learned a lot. And I wrote an adult confirmation class based on Lutheran liturgy from the divine service that was in the supplement and the service of word and sacrament that was in the red hymnal. Thankfully, a couple of pastors have taken it on, and then they're renewing the class using the new blue hymnal. And then hopefully I'll start doing those classes again. So encourage your people, your friends to do this. We had this conversation yesterday in 7th grade catechism class. I asked one of the young ladies, black 7th grader, and she was wearing her church shirt. So it's not a Wells church. But I just asked her, I said, Natalie, if you had a boyfriend, let's say you're older, and the boyfriend's, and you're really in love with him, you really want to get married to him, and he says, it's either me or your church and your faith, what are you going to say? She goes, nope. That's awesome. She would tell him, hit the road. And I told that story, and I asked them this because tomorrow you're here in the Thirsty podcast, we had on John Rockoff, and he's an older pastor, but he was talking about how he's got a young lady in his church that this happened to, that fell in love with this guy, but he had He was an atheist, had no interest in the church, and really made that ultimatum. It's either me or your God. And she said, nope. And then he goes, oh, well, maybe I should give this church thing a try then. And so now Pastor Rockoff said he's got like 2 classes left, and then he'll be confirmed. And just a few weeks later, they're going to be married. And I'm knowing him, he'll put this in the wedding sermon, this whole story, but then also the story about how they're doing everything right, that they're not living together, not trying each other out, that they went to look at an apartment that's across the road from the church. And the landlord then said, well, there's a nice church right across the road for this, nice young couple. And then the young lady said, oh, that's my church. I grew up there. And the guy said, the landlord said, you know what? You're way at the bottom of the list. I'm putting you at the top of the list. And I'm sure Pastor Rockoff said, see, God blesses you when you do things right. And then the guy is going to be moving into the apartment until they're married. And I just use that as an example of when you hold to the truth of God's word, the teachings that Paul is talking about, he's going to bless that. I had this written here. I thought this is important. This letter, Romans, was written to prepare the churches in Rome to help Paul on his way to Spain. How does unity of doctrine and practice foster mission work? Only when a church is concerned about the Lord's teachings will it want to spread those teachings to others. And I'm okay, you're okay attitude about doctrine produces a sluggish missionary spirit. The history of mission work in churches who have joined the ecumenical movement demonstrates the truth of this. May the Lord bless us by giving us a firm grasp on the truth and the desire to spread his gospel to others. Yesterday, I was at the Christian Friends group at Michael's on the Lake. And when I went to get a drink over at the bar, the bartender was there. And he asked, who is this group? And I said, well, this is the Christian Friends. Those are 50 and over that are from a Water of Life church in Racine. And he asked about the church. And he asked where it was. And he goes, I don't know where that is. I said, I know. We merged 2 churches and no one knows where they are. And he asked, well, why did you merge? And I said, well, so we could have 2 pastors, although I'm only pastor right now. And then he was talking about how they now have 1 priest that's of 4 parishes. And so is it kind of an interesting concept that, he said that 3 churches know they get Sunday morning service, and then once a month, the 1 parish does not have a Sunday service, it has a Saturday service. And he just says, no, third Saturday is their service. And I just share that because churches are going to do, the Catholic Church, our Lutheran Church, if we believe we have the truth, we're going to do whatever is possible, whatever is necessary to get that truth out there. Any questions on anything that we've studied here?
Talked about this before, but I think the problem that Wells has is that they're Lutheran and with other Lutheran churches. Mm-hmm. I just say that before I think Wells, Lutheran was Lutheran.
Yeah.
Everybody Lutheran was the same. They were Lutheran. I didn't know the difference between Missouri Synod or Wells Synod or ELCA or to me they were all the same. And I think that's probably a predominant viewpoint of anybody that's not Lutheran. They don't know that there's different. And I just mentioned that because I lived next door to a Tone Lutheran church. So one day about 20 years ago, I went over to talk to the pastor over there, little old guy, and we sat down and talked for like an hour. And when I got done and I left, I said to myself, this guy doesn't even believe what's in the Bible to be true. The stories in the Bible, he was trying to explain them. He was trying to rationalize them. Well, this didn't really happen, I'm like, well,
yeah.
And then you come here and then it sounded right. So,
yeah, that is an issue when people hear of Lutheran and they're going to think of the wackadoodles in the ELCA who don't believe in.
They're the biggest Lutheran church.
Yeah. And yet, like Robin said with the Missouri Synod, that by God's grace, there are so many in their church body that are pretty much WELS. They agree with us. Unfortunately, there are those that are closer to the ELCA because I remember when I was in Georgia, we had a family that I was taking through classes that their Missouri Synod pastor in Louisiana told them, when you move to Georgia, join a WELS church. Don't join the Missouri Synod churches because they're not right. And that was their own Missouri Synod pastor. And that's the difficulty you have in the Missouri Synod. I just saw this on Facebook before I came for the Bible study, that our own WELS pastors had shared this, that President Matthew Harrison, president of the Missouri Synod, had spoken out about something that's going on with their Missouri Synod colleges, or at least at one of them. And, these are WELS pastors saying, thank the Lord for President Harrison, who actually spoke at our Synod convention. He's the first Missouri Synod president to ever speak at a WELS Synod convention, because he is in fellowship, doctrinal agreement with us. And thankfully, we still have these conversations. And what he says is, it's not an issue with the WELS, it's an issue in the Missouri Synod. He said, we have to clean things up.
For example, what's one example that differentiates the two?
Oh, ministry, about roles of men and women. Sometimes it might be, who are ministers. A big one on church fellowship. That was the one that broke us apart. Church fellowship. Well, we can talk about that a little bit later. So, but that's why we just keep praying for growth in the Christian church. We'll finish up here. So we're going to be taking a break. Then for the summer, Lord willing, we'll pick it up in September. We're going to study the book of Hebrews because we don't know that book very well. I just wanted to end this Bible study by reading the doxology at the end. Now to him who is able to strengthen you, according to my gospel and the proclamation of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery that was veiled in silence for long ages past, but now has been revealed through the prophetic scriptures and made known to all the Gentiles, in keeping with the command of the eternal God, resulting in the obedience of faith. To God, who alone is wise, be glory forever through Jesus Christ. Amen.